Russian campaign for the summer so far has not rendered its desired results. We can speak about the specific example of the northern part of the theater near Sumy. The Russians had tried to snowball their spring counteroffensive in Kursk into a spring offensive into Sumy, which is still ongoing. But there are indications that that campaign has also been slowing out. In mid last month, in June, the Ukrainians liberated a village that the Russians had previously seized in Sumy. We've seen some increasing small-scale Ukrainian counterattacks in the region, and they actually have rolled back some very small parts of the map there. So that effort appears to have been petering out as well.
It's clear that the Russians are using what they're calling successes from an information perspective to try and suggest that they're doing better than they actually are. But then on the same way, the Ukrainians have said that the Russian summer or spring offensive has effectively stalled. Are the Ukrainians right? Has it stalled? Are the Russians having real difficulties, or is this just ignoring the sort of the very low level, low tactical gains that Russia's making, and signposting the fact that they're not going to make any large gains over the summer months?
Yeah, Russia's summer offensive so far has been very underwhelming. The summer offensive is underway. It has been underway for a number of weeks, but there's been no decisive breakthroughs. The prospect for a Russian operational level breakthrough is very, very small. Again, they make these small tactical gains where in the course of weeks they can seize fields and they can seize villages, and over the course of many months that can add up to something that resembles a slow form of operational maneuver, but it's certainly no sort of breakthrough. And yes, I would agree with the assessment that the Russian campaign for the summer so far has not rendered its desired results. We can speak about the specific example of the northern part of the theater near Sumy. The Russians had tried to snowball their spring counteroffensive in Kursk into a spring offensive into Sumy, which is still ongoing. But there are indications that that campaign has also been slowing out. In mid last month, in June, the Ukrainians liberated a village that the Russians had previously seized in Sumy. We've seen some increasing small-scale Ukrainian counterattacks in the region, and they actually have rolled back some very small parts of the map there. So that effort appears to have been petering out as well.
Why do you think this is? Why are the Russians, which on paper, whenever they started this war, the second best military in the world, allegedly, why can they not generate the combat capability to be able to take territory against what on paper was not a very strong military force at all?
A very complex question with a nuanced answer. So look, in the beginning of 2022, Putin had a major departure from Russian doctrine for how to conduct major large-scale operations. The Russian military, as you know, before they go into large-scale combat operations, they're supposed to do a mobilization to flesh out all of their on-paper brigades and regiments, but through a involuntary mobilization, because they have a reserve and cadre system. Putin didn't do that. He took instead the professional cadre, morsalized them into about 120 or so reinforced battalions, which the Russians call battalion tactical groups, and then marched those 120 disparate reinforced battalions against Ukraine, and in the process of doing so, eviscerated the Russian officer corps and destroyed the most professional elements of the Russian military. And since then, it's been working with the remnants and the slop and the path dependencies of what was then, back then, what was created back then. So that's a key issue. Other big mistake that Putin made is that he's had fourth generation constraints because he has refused to use the Russian state's monopoly of violence to coerce hundreds of thousands or millions of Russians to go serve in Ukraine, but with the exception of the 300,000 he mobilized in September 2022. He instead pays volunteers to go to Ukraine, and the compensation packages that he's had to offer to entice and lure Russians to go fight have had to grow. They've had to grow, and those packages have since become enormous because, frankly, they're chasing fewer people, and it's messed up the Russian economy in a variety of ways that we can talk about that have created horrendous externalities. Thirdly, the Russians don't know how to conduct operational maneuver, and for that record, neither do the Ukrainians, neither do the Americans. Nobody knows how to, because we now have a transparent battlefield where drones pilots are able to strike and interdict columns at their assembly areas or as they're moving in position to go attack the zero line before they get within 5 to 10 kilometers of the zero line. And so all of your tactical doctrine for how do you breach a defense in depth. How do you take a tank column or an infantry mechanized battalion and bring it through an enemy position. All the tactical doctrine has been invalidated because now you have to worry about tactical low level small air defense, tactical electronic warfare. Electronic warfare is not echeloned properly in the Russian military to protect small scale tactical units. And so neither side have really discovered how do you get across and conduct maneuver when these drones can bring precision killing at wholesale price and completely obliterate a conventional maneuver force before it gets close. And so that's resulted with a whole mushrooming effect of these new tactical adaptations, some of which I think are going to stick, and some of which are going to are experimental and not going to stick. But the Russians are bringing in motorcycles and buggies, and not just using them at an ad hoc basis, building brand new tactical units, motorcycle platoons, motorcycle companies as an actual coherent, unit with real tactics to try to use the smaller signature of a smaller vehicle and a faster speed to try to evade and provide some concealment from the drones with mixed results. So it's all of these reasons. This is why the superior Russian military has not been able to decisively defeat Ukraine, which on paper it should have been able to.
Well, yes, the level of evolution of tactics on the battlefield is phenomenal on both sides. The Russians are doing it, the Ukrainians are doing it. But I agree with what you're saying about the way doctrinally they have been able to sort of get their all arms packages together and fight them. In the sorts of packages that you want to do to have an effect on the tactical battlefield. But the one thing that seems to be having an effect is that the Ukrainian long-range drone attacks that are going in. Are we seeing operational maneuver happening over a much wider area? And these, in traditional terms, you'd say these were operational level attacks that the Ukrainians are putting in to impact Russia's ability to continue to sustain the tactical operations on the front line. If they can't get the right kit down and they can't get the ammunition down, they can't get everything else down, the poor officer corps, the detritus that's left, the lack of experience that's there finds it even more difficult to fight, and hence why the casualties are so high. Do you think war is changing so that we're going to have to see much more of this operational level maneuver that these Ukrainian long-range strike drones are having an effect on Russia's ability to continue to sustain their military operations?
If I understand the question correctly, yes, we are going to have to, through brute force, learn how to restore operational maneuver to the battlefield. We are in a World War I Western Front-esque situation where new tactics and new technologies have deprived operational maneuver from the battlefield, and commanders are now trying through brute force just how to restore it. The story of the Western Front was for 2 or 3 years, from roughly 1915 to early 1918. There were hundreds of thousands of young men that were killed trying to implement tactical innovations to how to move forward. There's a little bit of a popular history that the generals really sent waves and waves of men without trying anything new. Each one of those attacks had a new concept, a new tactic that they were experimenting with to try to restore maneuver. And everyone forgets that in World War I, it ended with maneuver. The Allies discovered how to restore maneuver to the battlefield, and that's why you got the conditional surrender of the Axis powers. We're in a similar place right now, where with the drone picture and the electronic warfare picture, that arrayed with all of the conventional military equipment that we all know and love, nobody knows how to restore operational maneuver. And so, yes, there's a role for deep strikes. There are some deficiencies of thinking about deep strikes from both the Ukrainian and Russian side at this time, in my assessment. But all these things have to come together, and I'm convinced that one side will figure it out sooner or later, and I hope that the Ukrainians will figure it out first.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. President Zelensky turned around and talked about targeting Russian military infrastructure inside Russia itself, and said, we target military infrastructure, we don't target civilian infrastructure. The Russian response to what's going on seems to be an increasing amount of targeting against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people, which is a typical Russian tactic in dealing with things. Do you think that's going to prove successful for them, or do you think it's a tactic that they're just misunderstanding the opposition?
So I think both the Russians and Ukrainians are guilty of this. they both conduct strikes into each other's rears. The Ukrainians go after military targets. The Russians go after both military and civilian targets. And I think they both incorrectly assess that they can achieve decisive effects and end the war by degrading each other's morale with these deep strikes. And I just don't think that's quite accurate, because I don't fundamentally think this attacks the center of gravity of Putin's theory of victory in the Ukrainian instance with their strikes. And then for the Russian instance, I don't think that they're likely to achieve a political capitulation by terrorizing civilians, because for the Ukrainians, it's an existential war. So, look, from the Ukrainian side, I would like to see strikes that are less so pop shots of opportunity to take out high value targets. Those are all great, and I support all of them. But I'm not seeing the connective tissue for how the strategic or deep operational strikes end up supporting the operational art to help maneuver, help restore campaigns, help restore maneuver, and achieve what we call battlefield air interdiction. Essentially, geographically isolating an exploitation and penetration sector of the line to ensure that nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The supplies that were supposed to get there are denied because you took out the key logistical junctions that they were supposed to transit through, and et cetera. And I'd like to see some of that higher level operational thinking from the Ukrainian side, but so far it just seems to be these spectacular and beautiful shots, but that certainly have an effect, but that are not yet adequately integrated into these more comprehensive campaigns.
Now, you talk about Ukraine. What are you saying of Ukraine's adaptation of its defensive strategies in the face of the large scale Russian attacks, or the waves of human beings coming into the meat grinder almost? Are there any lessons that they're pulling out that we should be noting in the West, or is it just needs must at the moment on as you say, a First World War type battlefield, but over a much wider area because of where drones are being used as what were direct fire weapons ranges in the past?
Yeah, Ukraine is the key war that is going to define the character of warfare moving forward. Of course, no war is exactly like the same, but some wars are transformative for the nature and character of war. The analogy that we like to use here at the Institute is the current war of Ukraine is to like the next global war as the Spanish Civil War was to the Second World War. And those of you who appreciate military history can understand some of the nuances and concepts and themes within that analogy. What we've learned is that, look, the Western defense industrial base, including that of behemoth the United States, is not prepared to sustain the tempo of large-scale war. I mean, we are bust for Patriot interceptors between supporting Israel and Ukraine, let alone defending American troops at scale in a peer or near peer fight. So that's a major red flag. In 2022, the United States and the European Union and NATO, we were bust for 155 millimeter shells, simply just supporting what the Ukrainians need every day, let alone for our own defense. And so there are huge implications for resourcing and defense spending, strategic investment levels, and then at the tactical level of warfare, the U.S. Army has recently tried to implement a new provision where they will now give every American infantry division 1,000 drones, which is great. But the Ukrainians shoot something on the order of 20 to 25,000 drones a day in their war against Russia. And so, we are moving in the right direction, but damn it, we're slow, and the Ukrainians and the Russians are just blistering and pacing way ahead, and we have a lot to learn from them.
Yeah, well, I saw a French concept where they've got 3D printers to print drones in the field, and this is the sort of thing I think we're going to see in the future. Now, I think time's getting against us at the moment, but looking at all the recent developments, what is your view from an ISW perspective on the trajectory of the conflict in the coming weeks, months, and what do you think where do you think the world is going with the three major conflicts that we've got either in course or brewing potentially? I put Southeast Asia as a potential brewing conflict.
We're not going to get a ceasefire into this war in 2025. That much is clear. It's our assessment that this war is going to likely go on for many, many more months. My personal assessment is that this will probably be at least another 2 years of conventional war fighting. We have done nothing to try to persuade Putin to stop trying to achieve tactical gains on the battlefield, and he's incentivized to keep going and play a game of chicken with us. In terms of the global situation, look, we are in a 1937 moment on the global scale. Our adversaries are teaming at the door. They sense blood in the water. They sense opportunity. War is a tragic and an inevitable part of the human experience. We are overdue for another big global large war. Really, the period of 80 years of relative stability and global peace that we had since 1945 to present has been an anomaly in the human experience, and we need to prepare for the worst case scenarios moving into the future.
Well, George, in We Need to Prepare, I think that is a good place to stop. You've also given me the food for being able to call you back again and get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me today on Times Radio Frontline.
Thank you very much for having me, Philip. Always a pleasure.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.